Hey drinking buddies, the Inakiyaki Pre-Sale is going on now. This award-winning rice cake has subtle flavors of sesame seeds, salt, shrimp, and seaweed. Add a tangy cheese, hummus, or your own favorite topping and pair with an ice-cold beverage. The pre-order has started, so head to www.thedrinkingbuddyshop.com and be the first to score our latest snack.
They said, well, you can't grow koshiyakari in the United States. And I said, well, don't think you understand. We've already grown it. I just want you to do a taste test and see if it's any good.
This is the Drinking Buddies Show, where we explore food, craft beverage pairings, and the entrepreneurs and tastemakers behind them. I'm Frank, founder of Drinking Buddy Artisan Snacks. On today's show, the Isbell family joins me from Isbell Farms in central Arkansas. The Isbell family has been farming in central Arkansas for generations. They gained international attention when they began growing premium Japanese rice, eventually bringing busloads of visitors to see their farm. I chatted with two generations of the Isbell family to learn about their history, sustainability practices, current sake and table rice varieties, and their plans for the future.
My dad came out of World War II, and they were giving $90 a month for some kind of educational program for the veterans.
This is Chris Isbell, the senior Isbell, or as he puts it.
Yeah, I'm the oldest here. And he decided that he wanted to grow rice. His dad grew cotton. His granddad grew cotton and had sawmills and sold timber. But when he came out of the Navy, he bought 40 acres of ground, I think, and cleared it. And there'd never been anything grown on it before. And so he wanted to try growing rice because rice had recently come into Lonoke County. And he wanted to see if he could do it. His curiosity thing, probably. But he started growing rice then and spent that $90 to raise his first rice crop. $90 a month. He put the first rice crop in. So it just grew and grew from there. We cleared more land, and there are no herbicides, no anything back then to keep the grass from growing. And so they would clear land and they'd have no grass seed bank in the soil. So they'd clear the land and grow rice on it for a year or two, and then lay it fallow and disc it up for a year or two, and then go back with rice. So that's how he started. And then he just bought more and more land and cleared more land, or bought land that was already cleared, and kept growing rice. And we tried soybeans, and my granddad still wanted to grow a little bit of cotton. So he grew some cotton on his land, and my dad grew rice. And it just slowly grew until my dad bought 1,000 acres here where we live right now at the exorbitant price of $250 an acre. And everyone told him that you'd never be able to pay for that. Nowadays, $6,000 an acre is price around here. So that's kind of how that started, slowly but surely.
Now, if you're like me, you'd be surprised there is rice farming in central Arkansas. Were the Isbells pioneers?
Mark, when was the first year?
I think there was some rice that was originally grown in Lonoke County in the late 1800s, and then, or maybe the very early 1900s, but it was a slow start. He was not the first to grow around here, but, to scale up and to go further, he was part of that first wave, I would say, of it catching on.
They were Japonica varieties. Back then it was blue rose, arc rose, which was just Arkansas rose. And then people recognized the name Cal Rose as California roses. Those were basically the same varieties at the time. Then there were the long grain varieties started later on. There was Fortuna, there was Zenith. There were 3 or 4 long grain varieties that started growing. And at that time, everyone was growing the medium grain Japonica, which is a Cal Rose type variety. Sticky rice, medium grain rice. Then Arkansas started growing more and more long grain, and they had a different market for that than the other. But in the 60s, we were still growing a variety called Arc Rose, and we were selling that. It was eventually sold to the Japanese trading companies. We did business with Nishimoto Trading with the koshiyakari later on, and one of the guys that came out was an older guy. He was the boss. he came out and he had been to Arkansas in the 60s and bought Arca Rose and Blue Rose. So we were selling to a co-op, and then the co-op was selling to the Japanese trading companies, I suppose. We never knew where the rice was going. We were just growing it and selling it through a co-op.
Okay. And so when do you transition to the premium sake rice?
The Koshi Hikari, which is table rice, and the sake rice started in like 1990, 89, 90. We didn't know we were growing sake rice. We were just growing different varieties of Japanese rice, and one of them happened to be Yamada Nishiki.
A chance meeting would inspire Chris to start growing Koshi Hikari, a variety only grown in Japan.
I started going to technical venues. It's called Rice Technical Workers Group, and it's all of the rice researchers from all over the world meet every 2 years. Specifically, this was America, but there were also international people too. They meet every 2 years, and then they show the research they've done. They show their papers, and those are all PhDs in rice research. And I'm kind of weird, and I wanted to know the intricacies of what was going on in the rice world. And I thought the best way to do that would be to go to these meetings with these guys that were talking. Maybe I could learn something. So I had gone to one in Louisiana and really liked it. And that was close. And so I got my feet wet there. The next one was in Sacramento, Davis College. They were all PhD researchers. And I walked up to the register and they said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I'm a grower." They said, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm just a farmer." And so they gave me a tag that said grower. And as I walked around with all of the researchers, they were interested to talk to me because it was kind of like they'd never really talked to a rice farmer before. And so I got acquainted with a lot of people really quick at those meetings, and ran into Shoichi Ito. He was kind of a wallflower. He was out of his element. He was leaning up against the wall, and I kind of felt sorry for him. So I went over to talk to him and make him feel welcome, I guess. He started talking about Japanese rice and how it was different from anything that we sold or grew. And so I just listened, and he said this Koshi Hikari was the best rice in the world, but it wouldn't grow anywhere but Japan. And so I guess I'm that guy that figured that if it was rice, that it would grow in the United States. And so I became intrigued with that. Later on, I came home and I got my globe and I checked the latitude of Arkansas versus Japan, and sure enough, it was perfect. So I got some seed and I tried to grow the rice here, and it was successful.
There are some challenges to growing Japanese rice in the U.S., but they're not the obvious ones.
They have clay and we have clay. Our soils are predominantly heavy clay. We have some sandy fields, but not very many. Their humidity, their temperature, it's almost exactly the same. We have high humidity, which makes it terrible to live here, but nice to grow rice. The water was no problem. The only thing that was different from the varieties that we were growing is the Japanese varieties are tall and wiry and really tough to harvest. So we had some difficulties in the harvest time, but not the growing. We had been accustomed to growing difficult varieties already, and so we had what's called a draper header. Combines were suited for cutting down rice. Almost all the rice we cut was always down or lodged, which means it's just fallen over after it's matured, and you have to pick up the whole straw and run it through the machine instead of just coming along and standing rice and clipping the panicles and running that through the machine. So we were accustomed to that, but the Japanese rice was even a little bit tougher than what we were accustomed to. Basically, we just had to slow down. The main problem with the Japanese varieties is their yield is about half of what the Arkansas varieties are and our mainstream varieties.
So you have to slow down and spend more time just to get the same amount of rice again.
Slow down and spend more time and get less rice.
Yeah.
But, that can be made up in the price.
I was going to say that must drive up the price.
It does, but we've had fun doing it, and that's important.
Shoichi.
This is Whitney, Chris's daughter.
He said he was a wallflower at the thing, but he has become family to us, and we've actually called him Uncle now. So
Oh, really?
he spends a lot of time on the farm. We see him. We haven't seen him in several years, but we used to see him regularly before COVID.
Did you contact him as soon as you grew it successfully?
Yes.
What was his reaction?
Yeah.
Did he not believe you?
Well, he was skeptical. The story goes on. Once we grew enough of it for a taste test, we could cook it ourselves, but we didn't know if it was good or bad. So we didn't have internet back then. There's a book that lists every trading company in the United States in the library. So I went to the library and I looked at the book, and I knew Mitsubishi. You know, I didn't know many Japanese words, but I knew Mitsubishi back then. So I looked up Mitsubishi Trading Company and I called them. They were in California, and asked them if they would do a taste test. And they said no. And I said, why? They said, well, you can't grow Koshihikari in the United States. And I said, well, don't think you understand. We've already grown it. I just want you to do a taste test and see if it's any good. And he said, no. And I said, well, why? And he said, because you can't grow Koshihikari in the United States. So I went down the list. Under Mitsubishi, I saw Nishimoto. I knew that was a Japanese name. So I called Nishimoto Trading Company, and they said, yes, we would really like to try that. If you can grow Koshihikari in the United States, we can sell it. So I sent the sample to them, and they liked it, and we started growing it and selling it to Nishimoto Trading Company. Fast forward into about 1996, it was a big deal. I was in Japan, and there were companies that were wanting to do an exclusive with us to sell our rice in Japan when the market opened. And Mitsubishi was one of those that asked to be an exclusive trader. And so I was in Mitsubishi's headquarters with the guy from Los Angeles that didn't want to do the taste test, sitting at their conference table with their company bosses. At that time, we had already decided that we were going to go with the Itochu Trading Company because they were doing business here in Arkansas with some of the co-ops doing rice oil.
Chris didn't expect the incredible reaction from Japan.
When we were growing the Koshihikari, and Shoichi said that it couldn't be grown anywhere outside of Japan, well, it seems that everybody else thought the same thing. They must teach it in school over there. I don't know. But we sold the first Koshihikari. It hit the media in Japan. Nobody believed it. Everybody wanted to report it. We got reporters and magazines and newspapers and television stations, NHK, which is Japan's public broadcasting. Everybody came over. We had Greyhound buses every week. We had somebody from Japanese media here for several years. We had limousines and helicopters, and it was crazy. I mean, this is just a farm, and I'm just a farmer, and we weren't used to that sort of thing. But the kids kind of grew up in that light. It was really special for them. If nothing else, it was worth every bit of it just because of the way the kids were able to experience a world view. So we've had zero grade and now the sake rice, and the sustainability has created a new avenue for reporters and for interviews and things like that.
And the celebrity status didn't end quickly.
Probably 5-6 years of selling it. We sold it through Nishimoto. We sold it to domestic sales, and they were selling to Japanese restaurants, Japanese Americans, visitors, anything that market entailed. And it went really well. We were having trouble getting someone to mill the rice and package it. The rice mills in Arkansas are huge. They got train tracks on beside them, and they mill out, boxcar loads at a time. And we were talking like 10 trucks or more. It's too small for them to get any business in and get time for milling in. We struggled with that, and we had a small mill that was doing our milling, and they kept going up on their milling rates, and they were buying the rice also and selling it. And they started trying to dictate the price that they would buy the rice at, plus going up on the milling rate. I didn't like that. Also, California was growing Koshihikari by then, and they had the Japanese market kind of sealed off from us because of the transportation costs from Arkansas to the coast. They were also bickering among themselves over the price that they would sell their rice to California. And the price kept going down until it was just, we felt like it was too much trouble. So we started growing mostly long grain. The market is easy and relatively easy to market. We kept the kosher hikari seed and we still have it. We could go back in a year or two, we could be wide open again, but the kosher hikari has got a little bit of a problem. When the rice comes off of the panicle, a little part of the panicle stays on the rice grain, and it's like a hook. So when it's going through the combine and you're trying to separate the rice from the straw, this little hook hangs on everything. So you blow a lot of the rice out the back. So you're talking about half the yield of long grain or other varieties, and then you're still losing a lot of rice out of the back of the machine. We were losing here and losing there and losing in the price war too. So we decided, I guess, to rest up a little bit and to try and grow something else.
When we come back, we'll meet a few more of the Isbell family and learn about zero grade. Thanks for listening so far. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Then head to www.thedrinkingbuddyshop.com and pick up some tasty pub snacks, barware, and more. Every purchase you make helps us support small family-owned businesses in rural Japan and bring you more delicious, unique snacks to pair with your favorite beverages. Special thanks to all of you that have already started enjoying our snacks and sharing them with your buddies.
Isbell Farms, known as, but also Zero Grade is a company name we do business under, and we're known out there as both.
This is Mark, Chris's son.
The Zero Grade name, by the way, came from innovations that my dad and grandfather did back in the late 70s, which was a water-saving method and labor-saving method that levels the ground in a way that you can save 50% of the water that you do over traditional methods. But as my dad was saying, over the years, we transitioned away from the Kashiakari back to long grain, but we always kept experimental plots of some of the Japanese varieties that we would watch from year to year. And one of those was the Yamada Nishiki, which in, I would say, the early to mid 2000s is when we began getting inquiries about that, the first of which was from Takara. And we worked several years to build that up to the point where we could sell to them. And then eventually began also selling that to craft brewers around the United States through Blake Richardson up in Minnesota, who polishes that for us. So we will grow the Yamada Nishiki here on the farm and then have it milled to 90% and then send that on up to Minnesota, where he'll polish it to the ratios that are requested by the different breweries. And then we go out from there to breweries around the United States and throughout the world. In addition to the Yamada Nishiki, we have a small amount of omachi that we are selling at a few different breweries that they're trying new things with, and a couple of other varieties coming along as well. So we continue to have the long grain as our main portfolio as far as to carry the business on, with the sake rice being our specialty area to work in that we see steady, continual growth. We hope to expand it to more acreage from year to year.
Fantastic. And I definitely want to talk about which breweries you're working with. But before that, you mentioned the zero grade technique. I know sustainability is a big part of your brand and your farm. So can you talk a little bit about your sustainability practices?
The first of those is water savings. Rice is a big user of water around the world. If you're lucky enough to be adjacent to some adequate surface water, that's not a huge deal. And we have that for part of the year. But, if you look at, like in California right now, their acreage is way down this year because they didn't get the snowpack that they needed and there's horrible droughts. It's important to use as little water as possible. The zero grade opens that up for us. Another water saving method is alternate wetting and drying, which instead of continuing the flood throughout the entire season, we'll have a period where we let the rice dry up to a certain extent. And sometimes that can create an opportunity to save water, sometimes not as much, but the potential is there. The big thing that does, though, is mitigate methane emissions. Rice provides about 20% of the calories around the world. You take the amount of rice that's eaten around the world, it's responsible for 20% of the human energy that's out there. But with that comes some environmental impact. The wet soils do have the potential of creating methane emissions in some parts of the world or anywhere. And so finding ways to mitigate that's really important. And using the AWD method, we're able to minimize that by over 60%. And we have a ongoing research project with the Agriculture Research Service and the University of Arkansas that has measured that with some high-tech devices over multiple years. And we've helped create the data to inform those studies at the academic level. And we've seen that begin to create adoption of some of those techniques in a practical way too. Additionally, we have solar panels on the farm. So we're providing a roughly 30+% of our electricity that we need. And rice in this area is a huge supporter of wildlife habitat. So we're situated just along the Mississippi Flyway. So flooded rice fields throughout the winter, which that water is typically just rainwater that we're able to collect and hold throughout the winter, provide lots and lots of nutrition and habitat for migrating waterfowl. The sustainability story around rice production in the United States, specifically the Mid-South, is a very good one. And then we try to even kick that up a further notch here on our farm.
The zero grade is still a small part of the acreage in Arkansas.
This is Jeremy Jones, Whitney's husband.
Since Mark and Whitney's grandfather and Chris over the years, they were the pioneers in the zero grade type of farming. And there have been lots of farmers over the years since I've been here since the mid-90s. And especially in the late 90s and early 2000s, we would have people at the farm all the time trying to learn how we were doing what we were doing with zero grade. You drive around the country, you see a lot of fields that are still grown the traditional way, but you see a lot of fields that are zero grade as well. Most farmers are still rotating crops in our area here in central Arkansas. It's rice, soybeans, corn, some cotton, winter wheat. We are a little bit different in that our farm is 100% rice. You don't see a lot of that, but people have taken parts of their farm that seem to be more like our farm, which is, somewhat flood prone, lower lying heavy clay soil, and taking those farms that fit that and using zero grade as a way to farm rice continuously or even rotate crops on that zero grade.
Zero grade attracted attention well outside of Arkansas.
First, explaining the zero grade, it just means there's no grade, no slope to the field. It's completely flat like a tabletop with a road around the fields that you can drive around, and there are no contour levees. Each contour levee requires man hours to manipulate the water from one levee to the next. But we've leveled the whole farm completely flat. A friend of ours actually coined the phrase zero grade. George Dunklin's the first one I ever heard say it. There's zero grade to the field. There's no slope. So we kind of adopted that name for the farm. People have been here from Argentina, Panama. We actually visited the vice president of Panama has a rice farm, or did. We went down there and explained some of the technology to him. Also Costa Rica, Guatemala, Nicaragua, Russia,
Philippines, Australia, Belgium. Through the past 3 decades growing up here, it's been a continual procession of groups from all around the world, which is a great perspective to be able to experience.
Tell me a little bit more about which American sake breweries you're working with.
Takara was the first that we began doing business with back in the early to mid 2000s, I would say. They've been great to work with. They make a special limited release Junmai Ginjo with the Yamada. But then we began working with Blake Richardson out of Minnesota Rice and Milling, as well as Moto E there in Minnesota. And so he makes sake out of our rice, but also distributes a number of other breweries. Another one that we do direct, though, is Sake One. We have sold a little bit of omachi to Brooklyn Kura, doing some fantastic work there. And then, all the way from home brewers to startup craft breweries have tried our product. We do some business in Mexico as well. And then in Canada, from time to time, we sold some to Norway, Switzerland, Great Britain. So we go fairly widely.
But what is the Isbell family's vision for the future of their farm?
I think the sake rice is definitely a big part. The sustainability, will keep implementing as many practices as we can. Probably long grain is going to be the acreage wise will be the biggest part of the farm for the next few years. But with work that Mark has done and Whitney's done, Chris, I don't do much with the social media and the promotions, but they have really done a good job, I think, to reach out to those upstart sake brewers, craft sake breweries around the United States and around the world. I see that growing, and hopefully that part of the farm will begin to grow in with Yamada Nishiki and Omachi and any other variety that maybe we could get our hands on and grow in the future. We're a family farm. I mean, every one of us here are family, and Mark has kids. They're out here at the farm all the time. I have two kids, two teenage kids, or actually one is 20. He works on the farm, and they have both been able to get involved with our YouTube channel, with our social media. They work on those things, and it's just really cool to kind of see everybody as a family starting to work together. Not that we all haven't always worked together, but to have a story that we can tell around sake rice, kind of set ourselves apart from everyone else and give everyone a job to do to kind of promote that as a family is really cool to see.
I think that when you look back to how Granddaddy did things, he was always very innovative and he thought ahead. And so he kind of instilled that in my dad. He instilled that in us to kind of look forward to what does it look like in the future. So we're always trying to look ahead, even now, what comes next. And for us, that lately has been the social media and the YouTube channels and things like that, to be able to include and involve the world in what we do so that they can see what it looks like to be on a farm, see what it looks like to grow rice. There's a lot of questions surrounding that kind of thing. And we run into people that have no idea that rice is even grown in Arkansas. So to offer a way for them to see that, and the way production works, the way the equipment works, and the different ideas that we have day to day, it's just kind of been exciting to be that generation that we're looking forward to that thing, and we're able to include the world in it in a way that we've never been able to before.
I met someone from Little Rock, 45 minutes away from here, that had no idea rice was grown in Arkansas, which is so interesting because you don't have to go very far. You see rice fields everywhere in this part of the world, but people are not educated. They don't have any idea where their food comes from. And we want to be part telling that story of where the food comes from, how it's grown, let them on the inside of what we're doing here. That's been really interesting.
And technology allows that for the first time.
We can't predict the future, but we can try to plan for it. And our method of doing that is trying to situate ourselves in a place where, as the sake industry continues to grow, we'll be able to provide for that. I mean, we've seen the trajectory over the past years and where that seems to be going. I see the Yamada continuing to grow, but I also hope some of the other varieties that we have can fill a place so that as these different breweries begin to differentiate themselves and create new products, we can provide unique opportunities for them, whether it's specific varieties, different partnerships, with special releases, all kinds of opportunities that are out there. And we just want all the breweries to, know we're here to work with them and to partner with them as they try to grow their business.
Like you said, you get to tell your own story directly, which is something that you couldn't do. Even 10 years ago, it wouldn't have been easy to do that without, a TV crew and somebody else with lots of money doing it for you.
And now it's GoPro in my 20-year-old son's hand. Yeah,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. Now you can just put it on a GoPro and put it on YouTube. And it's funny, like you're saying, that people even nearby don't know that rice was grown there. Through sake, I learned about where rice was grown in California, and I grew up in California, and now I know about California. Now I know about Arkansas. And I think it's a great opportunity for people that are home brewing now. I feel like sake is like 20, 30 years behind beer and where the home brewing scene is. And people may not even be aware you could home brew sake yet. I think a lot of people have no idea that that's a thing they can do. So I see a lot of opportunity for you where eventually a lot of startups, they can get something, especially if they're closer out your way. It's close to home. They don't have to order it from Japan. They probably think, oh, there's no koji, there's no rice. I have to get all this stuff from overseas. And it's like, no, it's probably closer than you think.
Right.
Mark and I, and Whitney was talking about how looking over the hill and trying to see the future. We can't see the future, but we can imagine it. And I guess I have a vivid imagination. I like to do that. I like to think about what's coming. I enjoy it. I remember Mark, when he graduated college, we took a road trip. As we were on that road trip, we were talking about carbon credits. It was just a new thing then. Thought, well, if you're going to do carbon credits, how could you do it, and what would you do? And so that's kind of led up to today. We are one of the few rice farms that have ever grown carbon neutral rice and been able to sell the credits to Microsoft. We didn't get much money from it. It was like $137, but we got the experience. We know how. If carbon credits ever become valuable, we're already suited and set up for that.
Daddy has taught us that you can dream. He had a dream of planting Japanese rice in Arkansas, and we got to see like a wonderful thing come out of it. And so I think he's passed that down to us, that you can dream big and you can change your ideas and your ways. And
dreaming doesn't cost anything.
It's true. No, and it's funny that you speak to how nobody in Japan could believe it. It's very much, in my experience, anything that's Japanese outside of Japan amazes them.
Yes.
It was the same thing that they never saw the potential of any product that's popular around the world, whether it's sake or now anime and manga are huge in the United States.
My daughter's reading it right now.
There you go.
My Hero Academia.
Yeah. And they still to this day, the companies that produce it don't think it does well outside. It's taken them decades of Brazil, the United States, Israel, like all these countries around the world. France is another one where they're going, people like this outside of Japan, you should export it. And they're like, and so it's taking companies in those countries, like in the United States, Funimation and other companies like that, to say, no, we like it. And now all these American sake breweries, saying, we like it, we want to make it,
So many people, their sake experience has been hibachi grill with something that was probably less than premium. When someone becomes exposed to something that's really good and that's really special, it's kind of an eye-opening experience there. And then when you add to that the fact that some of it's made here domestically, even more so.
Do you have a favorite sake type?
Well, I'm fairly partial to the Junmai Ginjo there that Kura makes out of our Yamada Nishiki. Desai 45 is good as well. And then some of the samples we've gotten from all the other breweries we work with. I was on a road trip back in March, and I passed through Hallbrook, Arizona, tried Arizona first. That was really good. And then back up through Colorado sake. They're doing some good stuff. I made a mistake, though, in that I didn't realize the samples that I brought home with me. I tried it there. It was really good. I didn't realize they were unpasteurized. So I stuck it in my little drink area there and left it for a couple months until a friend, Ben Bell, stopped by about a month ago. And I said, hey, you should try some of this. It's pretty good. And one of them basically exploded in my dining room.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
So, you have to pay attention to, there's a lot we're still learning. Let's just say that. But there are a lot of people doing, and I have to also mention Naginata, which is a special release from Sake One in Oregon. They made that out of our Yamada Nishiki. Fantastic. And that's just super delicate. I don't know if anybody can get their hands on it at this point. It was a limited release as well, but they'll be making some more in the future. And it was fantastic. There's a lot of cool stuff happening out there. Trata and Omachi aged sake out of Brooklyn Kura, which was, I don't know that it was a release. Maybe it was just something they were trying.
Premium sake rice isn't the only thing growing on Isbell Farm.
Our main focus is obviously the premium sake rice varieties. We want to be able to provide those so that people can make really high quality, high end stuff. But there's a lot of other shelf space out there for stuff that maybe more mid-tier. Maybe you see some seltzers coming on. You see some different opportunities like that. And breweries can't necessarily afford super high-end sake rice for everything. And we want them to use it as much as they can, but we also want to add to our portfolio a more accessible grain that they can use for some of those other ones that may be a little less, might require less, the super high-end stuff like Yamada. And so this year we've released Somai, which is made out of a southern medium grain, which is filling the hole there that a lot of people use Calrose for all of those types of sakes. And the people that have tried it so far have had really good results. Calrose is a great product. I mean, we eat it ourselves from time to time, but it is an umbrella term that represents a number of different varieties. It's not just one specific variety. Typically, there are a number of different varieties out of California that fit under that umbrella term, all of which, I have to say are good, solid grains. But because of that, the consistency of one to the other may not be the same as something like what we're using out of the South, which is for the Somas, one specific unique variety, not just a term that encompasses several different varieties, but one specific, genetically the same variety. So the consistency from one batch to the other should be spot on. We are adding to that with some other southern sourced grains that should be in that same price point, have a little bit different grain size so that we can maybe get to a lower milling number on those. So there's a lot of exciting opportunity there, so that we're not, although our focus is the premium sake rice, we want to be able to have a full portfolio of products so that a brewer can access whatever they need to make all those different brews.
We also have Goyaka Mangoku, which is pretty famous in Japan, and Watari Bune, which is an heirloom rice in Japan that's been used for centuries for sake production.
When you mentioned the seltzers, I've seen a few now in Southern California, these canned sake beverages. So yeah, there's definitely some opportunity there.
And I think there's probably more of that in the pipeline with different breweries as well. So I think we'll continue to see that.
Yeah, I just tried one called Smooth Sailing, which they use Setting Sun sake, but it's 100% like a Gen Z seltzer kind of beverage, very easy to drink and comes in a can and meant to be drank cold. So yeah, it's exactly what Somai would be perfect for, something like that.
To those out there interested, we also have a sample kit of all this with more information. Glad to ship that to anyone.
Thanks so much to the Isbell family.
Instagram is just at Isbell Farms. Twitter is at Isbell Farms. I believe Facebook is at Isbell Farms Rice because somebody jumped in there and got our name.
Find out more about their amazing farm and rice by checking the links in our episode description. Next week, it's back to the West Coast to chat with Garrett Carroll of Ambitious Ales in Bixby Knolls. Thanks for listening to The Drinking Buddies Show. Be sure to subscribe and share it with your buddies. Check out our latest artisanal snack offerings at www.thedrinkingbuddyshop.com. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Take care and drink well.